Hello and welcome to DU Athletics COVID-19 Team Travel Protocol. My name is Adam Gleason. I am the Travel and Finance Coordinator with the Business Office here with DU Athletics. I'm a former Women's Basketball Director of Ops at Oklahoma State and here at DU. And below is my contact information if you have any questions after the end of this presentation. I know that this may not be a topic that is very exciting, but it's definitely necessary. And so I'll try to keep it as brief as I can, but that may result in some additional questions you have. So feel free to reach out. This slide will be shared at the end of the presentation as well. So the importance of this protocol is really around keeping you safe. So as you well know, with all of the training that you've had and all of the things that DU has in place currently, DU is committed to keeping you safe at all times, especially from COVID-19. What we also know is that the transmission of COVID-19 is more likely to occur off the field than it is on the field, or court, or ice, or any other playing surface. So knowing that, we think it's very important that you should know what to do while traveling to keep yourself safe, as that may be the more likely place that a transmission could occur. Also, it's very important to realize that it's a privilege to be able to travel and represent DU during this time. The rest of the university is on a travel ban currently, and so it's a very specific exception that athletics has. And so we need to demonstrate our ability as athletes and coaches and staff to keep DU and its community safe while we travel. This is a specific team travel protocol. So this is not for recruiting or personal use, and if you need to look at that as an employee, just go ahead and go to the DU COVID off-campus employee travel document. And what this protocol does is it allows us to waive the requirement to approve each individual trip with campus. However, we will have to provide some information to them for each trip. So for the staff member that's planning travel, we have a separate presentation about logistics that you'll need to watch, but you can also refer to the protocol itself to see what those requirements are and why I'm trying to make your job easier by being a bridge between athletics and campus so that we can meet all the requirements they have and continue to have our seasons and our travel schedules in place. Most importantly, this team travel protocol, while it's designed to keep you safe, and we surely hope that it does that, it also will make team travel look and operate very differently this year. And so there'll just be some things that we need to be creative on. And I think it's just important that we all approach this knowing that it's not going to be like a typical year. And so with that, we'll move forward to day trip travel. So as it suggests, this is trips that are local and don't have overnight stays. The pre-travel requirements, so these would be things that need to be done before a traveler ever takes their first team travel trip. They need to have completed the return to campus requirement as established by the university. But they also need, which everyone should have done as back in August or September with the different trainings that were required to return to campus. But the second thing is new, and they need to fill out the ARMS travel protocol acknowledgement form saying that they have read the protocol or watched this presentation and that they will adhere to the information within these protocols. The day of travel, so prior to departure, each of the travelers must have completed their daily symptom monitoring, which you're doing every day on the Everbridge app. Of course, if your temperature is above 100.4, you're not going to be allowed to travel. A staff member will take each traveler's temperature with a contactless thermometer prior to boarding the bus. So just kind of a double check there so that we don't travel with an individual who could be sick. Also, make sure you wash your hands or use hand sanitizer prior to boarding the bus, and maintain your distance and wear a face mask while you're waiting for the transportation to arrive. So common sense things, but good reminders that we should do. So now ground transportation, the bus has arrived, or the different transportation that you're going to be using has arrived. So here are the requirements for that. This is in particular to the university provided transportation. So something like our tennis vans or our ski vans that the university owns. So passengers in these scenarios should wear their face mask at all times, no buffs or bandanas, except when eating or drinking. Now, I would recommend avoiding eating and drinking whenever possible in the enclosed space of a vehicle, just to be extra cautious. But if you need to drink, a good solution may be a straw. You can keep your mask in place and still drink from a straw in that scenario. Also, if you can, don't sit directly next to a person. Maintain your distance of 6 feet. That's not going to be possible maybe in a van, but if you're in a bigger vehicle, and sit in every other row, again, if possible. Now, we understand that our teams may not have the opportunity to have that kind of space, and so a 50% capacity restriction has been waived for members that are all part of the same cohort as of the day of this presentation. Ground transportation continued for university provided. It's recommended that our coaches have a seating chart that keeps roommates close together and individuals in the same position group further apart. So say you're a soccer team and you're going to rent vans, we would recommend keeping the goalies in separate vehicles in case of a positive case, so that the contact tracing doesn't rule both goalies out. University will clean and disinfect these vehicles following the correct recommendations. So now on to contracted services. So in this case, this would be, charter bus services or rented vans and cars. Only pre-approved vendors can be utilized, and we have to have a contract on file. So again, if you're the staff member that's making the travel plans, refer to the logistics presentation. That will kind of go into that a little more in detail. A staff member has to be present on any contracted services vehicle at all times to monitor compliance with these protocols, and really avoid close contact with the bus driver. So I know a lot of times we give fist bumps or high fives, things like that. Definitely avoid that, and load and unload your own luggage so that you're just not having a person outside of the team touching some of your items. It's also recommended, again, that a seating chart be created that keeps roommates close and people within the same position group separated. Continuing on with contracted services for ground transportation, this is exactly the same as university vehicles. Wear your face mask. Don't eat or drink if you can. If you do need to drink, try to use a straw. But with buses, these other items may be a little more attainable. Not sitting directly next to another person, maintaining your distance, and sitting in every other row if it's possible. But the 50% capacity restriction has been waived at this time if you are part of the same cohort. Okay, on to food service requirements. So a lot of times when we're on the road, we typically eat in restaurants, have a lot of those opportunities. This year it'll look a lot different. You're not allowed to eat in restaurants. That's something that we're all dealing with in our daily life as well. But food from restaurants can be consumed. They just need to be pre-ordered and individually packaged and delivered or picked up via the drive-through or curbside pickup. Of course, grocery store items are also allowed, but try to use delivery service or pickup for that, or maybe even getting that prior to departing campus. Individually packaged items like snacks, of course, are allowed. Actually encourage that each person brings their own personal snacks with them, as that's the safest way to consume your food. And catering vendors can be used. We just need to make sure that we have COVID health and safety measures in place and that we have a contract with them as well. So if you're planning the meals, if you're the staff member planning the meals, again, refer to that logistics presentation and just work directly with me and we'll figure that out. Continuing on with food service requirements, like I've mentioned previously in the ground transportation area, we would really suggest that you avoid eating inside of a vehicle if you can. It's just a tight and closed space. So it's not ideal for those situations, but we also recognize that on long bus trips or maybe on a post-game meal when you're driving back to campus late at night, that you may need to have a meal in the bus. If that's the case, we just suggest that you establish a specific meal time where travelers are allowed to remove their masks and keep that to a minimum, and then replace the masks right at the end of that meal. So throughout the trip, there are several requirements you should keep. These are pretty common sense items, but good reminders as well is, just wash your hands and use hand sanitizer often, but especially after arriving at your final destination. Keep your contact with people outside of the testing schema. Another fancy word for outside of your team should be avoided. And travelers, must stay with the team at all times. Of course, social distancing should be observed in all public places. And when possible, you should avoid tight enclosed areas like elevators. Finally, just do what you've been doing on campus. Follow those COVID-19 protocols that you do every day. Do your symptom monitoring, wear your face masks, and maintain your social distance throughout the trip. Okay, overnight trips. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of similar things here, like your pre-trip requirements. You can go back and rewatch that section if you'd like, or refer to that slide as it's the same. Ground transportation requirements, again, you can refer to the previous section regarding ground transportation. The only addition would be ride-sharing services like Uber or Lyft would be prohibited, as well as public transportation. So coaches know using Uber from the hotel to go get something to eat, that is not allowed this year. Food service requirements, again, I would just recommend going back and reviewing the previous section. But there are two areas that would be new with overnight travel. You could have air transportation, and you will have hotels. So starting with air transportation, I would just say that the research currently shows that where people are contracting the virus when traveling by air is more often than not in the airport terminal. So time in the airplane, because of its ventilation systems, is actually not nearly as risky as the time spent in the terminal. So while it's good to be aware all the time while traveling by air, especially just be aware of what you're doing in the airport. So with that being said, we'll start out here with, of course, masks should be worn properly at all times in the airport or in the airplane, except when eating or drinking. If you're going to drink, use a straw. If you're going to eat, if you're in the terminal, maybe find a place where not very many people are sitting to eat rather than in a crowded area. And if you're going to eat in the plane, just try to keep your time with a mask off to a minimum. So every effort, of course, should be made to reduce interaction with people that aren't part of your team. But in an airport, you're going to have times that you have to interact with people outside of your teammates. So with this in mind, there's a couple of requirements that maybe will help reduce that time in where you're interacting with those people. Number one, a coach or a director of ops should coordinate the check-in process at the counter. Go get everybody's tickets at once versus everybody going up individually, checking the bags, that sort of thing. Coordinate that so that only one person is really interacting with the counter. Social distancing, of course, should be used at all times, but especially going through security and waiting to board the plane. Don't congregate like we usually do and what is typical that you see. Speaking of security, you should really stay together as a group when you go through security. So I know places like Denver have multiple security checkpoints that you can go to. I really advise that our team stay together and go through security as a group. You are allowed to wear your mask when you go through security. The agent may ask you to lower your mask for ID purposes, so do that and put it right back up. You can also request TSA agents change gloves if they need to search your bag. So that would be a good suggestion by us as well. Make sure you bring your hand sanitizer and wipes. Currently, you can bring up to a 12-ounce bottle of hand sanitizer through security with you. And make sure you use that sanitizer before you go through security as well as after. The bins and the different things that go along with security are high-touch areas. And so using that hand sanitizer on both ends is important. Finally, you could consider wearing gloves when going through security just to protect yourself while traveling. It's not a requirement, just a thought. Finally, just avoid congregating or talking with people outside of the team. So, if you're waiting in line for security, don't really strike up those conversations with strangers, stick with the group. So this one's a little bit tough. Purchasing food from airport terminal vendors is prohibited. So I know a lot of our teams use per diem to get meals while they wait for their planes in the airport, but that is one of the highest areas of transmission that we are aware of is purchasing food and eating, in the restaurants and around the airport terminal. So just to avoid that area with high groups of people and another counter and some of those things, it is prohibited to buy food in the airport. Now, we realize that you may need to fill up an empty water bottle that you brought through security. So purchasing a bottled water is permitted, but we would highly, highly, highly recommend that a staff member coordinate this purchase, purchase multiple bottles of water for the team rather than each individual person going to purchase that. Again, similar to this, we recommend you bring your own empty water bottle as well as prepackaged snacks for consumption in the airport or on the airplane. So bring plenty in case you get delayed and different things like that, so that you have something to eat until you arrive at your final destination. Pack those snacks in a clear plastic bag so TSA security doesn't have to touch all of your things if they need to check that food. They can just touch the bag and not have to touch each individual. So now when we talk about getting onto the plane, we really want you to avoid sitting in the same row as a person who's not a member of the team, the testing schema. So if you're flying on an airline like United, where there's assigned seating, the coach or the director of ops should work with our travel management company to keep the group together. If you're flying on Southwest, just make every effort you can to sit together as a group. And don't be afraid to ask individuals if they're willing to, move so that you can stay as a group. I know that can be awkward, but you can explain that as part of a team, you have a specific testing protocol that you're trying to follow. Also, it's recommended that our teams create that same seating chart that they did for ground transportation. They do that for time on the plane as well. That keeps roommates close together and position groups separated in the event that we need to do contact tracing. So we talked earlier about bringing your hand sanitizer and your sanitizing wipes. Getting on the plane is going to be one area where you really want to take out those wipes and wipe down any high touch areas like your seat, your seat belt, tray table, seat backing, window area, all of those things before you sit down. Also, just use your hand sanitizer often throughout the trip, but especially, once you've sat down in your seat, use that hand sanitizer, again, just to be extra safe. And then finally, this is the most important thing in the airplane, is to open that air vent to ensure the proper ventilation. So what the research is saying is that the ventilation systems in airplanes are what is keeping people safe, of course, as well as wearing your mask during travel, but that air ventilation is constantly fresh air is being circulated in, and the blowing of the air is kind of creating almost an invisible shield around you at times. And so even if it's cold, you need to keep that vent open. So we suggest bringing a jacket or an extra layer in case it does get cold, but you need to keep that open. Now, this may be the dad in me, but go to the bathroom before you get on the flight to avoid having to use the in-flight restroom. However, I know it's going to happen. You may need to use the restroom while in the air. If that's the case, try to avoid waiting in line for the restroom. Just keep your eye on it and get up from your seat when it's available. When you go, make sure you use your sanitizing wipe to clean those common touch surfaces. And then for sure, wash your hands or use sanitizer before returning to your seat. Most airlines are not going to offer snacks or beverages or anything like that. But if they do, just avoid accepting those and stick to your personal snacks and drinks that you brought. And when you get to your final destination and it's time to deboard, definitely abide by the social distancing rules that the airline has and refrain from congregating in the aisle. Just stay in your seat until it's time to get up and deboard the plane. So now as you go through the arrival airport and you get to the baggage claim, just stick together as a team, and it's really advised to have a few staff members stand at the conveyor belt and remove the luggage and pass it on to everybody in the travel party. When you get your specific bag, go ahead and wipe that down with a sanitizing wipe, as you don't know who packed it and who touched it. So just to be extra cautious, wipe that down. Okay, now on to lodging and hotel requirements. Everybody on the trip should be assigned one person per room unless you're part of the same cohort. So in that case, sport programs cannot exceed more than 2 people per room. I know some of our teams have had 3 people per room in the past. This year, that is not an option. And it's also recommended that staff members stay in single rooms just because, you don't have an on-campus roommate. So for contact tracing pieces, it's easier to keep you in single rooms. Whenever possible, you should keep campus roommates together and position members apart, because if there's a positive and there's contact tracing occurring, you want to make sure that everybody is able to know what to do. Continuing on, travelers should really not share bathrooms other than with their roommate if they have one. Try to stick to using the bathroom in your assigned room, and definitely don't use common area restrooms like in the lobby or the workout facility. And speaking of lobby and common areas, I know a lot of times that there's opportunities to hang out there, talk to others, and congregate to avoid doing that this year. And really just stick to your own hotel room except for team activities. So it's kind of one of those years where you're going to kind of isolate in your room until it's time to go to your film session or your practice or the game or a team meal. It's also recommended that a staff member purchase individually packaged water bottles and snacks, just so that people have something to eat and drink and don't have to leave the hotel or order things in. When you arrive at the hotel, coaches, I would just highly encourage that you coordinate that check-in process so that keys are pre-made, you can hand them out, and then there's no congregating in the lobby waiting for a check-in process on that. Okay, requirements throughout the trip, these are the same as previously, but it's good to remember. Again, just wash your hands often, use that hand sanitizer, keep your contact with people outside of the team, the testing schema, just avoid that. I know that can be hard because that may include family and friends who come to watch you, but to keep our team safe and to keep the season rolling, we need to avoid that contact whenever possible. Social distance yourself, avoid tight enclosed areas like elevators, and definitely just follow all the things you've been doing on campus. Do your symptom monitoring every day, wear your face mask, and maintain your social distance. Okay, now we are all working really hard to make sure that somebody who is sick or who is positive does not travel with us, so that we don't have to encounter a positive or symptomatic person during a trip. But in the event that it occurs, here are some guidelines that we'll go off of as we try to figure out the best plan for that scenario. So a symptomatic traveler is obviously someone who starts to express symptoms of COVID-19 while they're traveling in an overnight trip. If this is the case, you should consult with the DU sports medicine personnel that's on the trip. Immediately, you should isolate to your hotel room. This may mean if they have a roommate, you need to separate the two, get an extra room or something like that. And then have food and drink delivered by a staff member to anybody who's isolated. The coach and director of ops should notify report COVID at du.edu, and then logistical arrangements will be made to transport the individual back to Denver if that is possible. The individual, of course, will not have access to the DU campus for 10 days or until they have a negative test and are 24 hours symptom-free. Other participants don't need to be notified, but daily symptom monitoring should continue. Now, close contact is someone who is determined to be in or notified as having close contact with a known positive case. That would be defined as being within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more cumulatively over a 24-hour period. If this occurs, the coach or director of ops should notify report COVID at du.edu. The individual must isolate in the hotel room with food and drink being delivered. Logistical arrangements will be made to transport the individual back to Denver. That person will no longer have access to the DU campus for 14 days, and others don't need to be notified, but symptom monitoring should continue. Finally, if there is a positive COVID-19 individual on the trip, the individual should alert their DU sports medicine personnel if they don't already know. They have to hit the COVID self-report button on the Everbridge app. The coach or director of ops must notify report COVID. They're going to isolate in the hotel room with food and drink being delivered. Logistical arrangements will be made. That person doesn't have access to campus for 10 days after the test date, 3 days of declining symptoms, and 1 day of fever-free with no medication. And then the additional step will be with the help of the DU contact tracing team. The coach and director of ops will need to facilitate the notification of participants who've been determined to be in close contact and provide vicinity notices to those who were in the vicinity. Okay, so all of that to say that if there is a positive or a symptomatic or a close contact, the priority is to get that person back to Denver as safely as possible so that the DU system can take care of them properly. DU athletics will have to defer to local city, state public health orders regarding transporting COVID-19 positives. So, a state or a city may not allow you to leave, which means you might have to quarantine in that location if you are a positive. If that's the case, we will work with you. We'll make sure that you're taken care of. And these next slides will kind of talk a little bit more about that. So if the city and state and local health officials allow us to travel and bring you back to campus, then first we have to see if the host city is within driving distance. If it is, then a staff member will be identified, in fact, should have been identified prior to travel, that will rent a separate vehicle and drive the affected individual back to campus. Both the staff member and the individual will have N95 masks to use during that trip back to Denver. And once you get here, you will abide by the COVID-19 protocols provided by the university. Now, let's say that we're in a city that's too far to drive, or the public health officials say that we're not allowed to drive you back to campus. If that's the case, then you would quarantine on the host campus's site, potentially, with meals and medical care being provided. If that's the case, a staff member may not be required to stay for the 10 to 14-day quarantine period, and transportation would be arranged after your quarantine. If, however, the campus cannot house you and you're going to stay in a hotel or another alternative accommodation, a staff member would stay in town to provide meals and transportation after the quarantine is over. In either case, if the individual is a minor, we would have a staff member stay back in town with the affected. Okay, let's say we get back home, one of our travelers gets a positive. If that's the case, DU would contact the opponent and conference office as soon as possible and notify them of the positive result. The same is true if we have anybody come play us here at DU. If they have a positive after travel, they would contact us and let us know so that we can do internal contact tracing and extra testing if necessary. Finally, if there is cancellation or rescheduling of away competitions, how these determinations get made is that DU Athletics works very closely with our opponent schools, conferences, and the NCAA, as well as governmental authorities to determine if travel is safe or if competitions should be canceled or postponed. In the event that any of these people make the determination that travel should be paused, then we would abide by those decisions. Okay, so in conclusion, as you can see, there's a lot going on there. I'm sure there were some questions that you may have had. Definitely feel free to reach out to me with those questions. But, generally speaking, follow the common sense, follow the things that you're doing already while you're on the road, and be extra cautious to wash your hands, wear your face mask, keep the distancing, and just realize that the actions that you do on the road are going to have the effect of whether the season continues or we have to miss certain contests. So just be extra cautious, do the best that you can, work with your coaches. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, here's my cell phone number, as well as my email. If you need to talk about something, you can give me a call or have your coach call with the questions if that's more comfortable for you, or just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to get back to you and try to do the best I can to get the answers that you need. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and best of luck out there. Go Pios.